today's Snack and Learn webinar entitled How WSP Used Sugar to Make Children Healthier. But before we get started, just a couple of points on housekeeping, please. If you could post any questions you have within the question box, and we'll pick up the responses to those in the Q&A at the end of the session. And you're also able to access a PDF version of our presentation within the handout box, so you can refer to that as we go through. But for now, let's begin. So this project is focused on the innovative design and delivery of 15 running tracks in the county of Shropshire in the United Kingdom. And the main focus of today's presentation is to share with you how we, WSP, embedded equity into this project to ensure that the end product was suitable for all the customers that would be using the tracks. And in our case, they are the children of Shropshire primary schools. Next slide, please, Ben. But before we dive in, we'd like to introduce ourselves. My name's Gahonia, and I'm a Service Director in WSP's UK Local Government Discipline, which is one of the newest additions to the Transport and Infrastructure Business Unit and was launched back in 2019. We are the #1 UK's highways and transport professional services provider, with around 15 core contracts and over 600 staff dedicating to serving our local authority platinum clients. And I'm delighted and privileged to introduce Ben today, who will be co-presenting with me. Ben, as well as being Shropshire born and bred, is an Associate Director leading our capital delivery team on the Shropshire Council Professional Services contract. And in the next slide, I'll share a little bit more about Ben's special connection to this scheme and to this client. But for now, welcome to all of you. Next slide, please, Ben. So today, Ben and I have the next 20 minutes or so of your time, and we'll take you through the highlights of our project. This will include a short video summarising what was achieved. We'll then take a look at the health of children in Shropshire and share our definition of equity. We'll then move on to talk about some of the key challenges, innovations that dropped out of this important project, and finally, we'll share some key takeaways for you. And these takeaways stem from embedding the principle of equity at the very start of the project. We hope that by the end of the session, having seen how we adapted and adopted equity, that you might wish to try the same in your projects. We'll also reserve some time at the end just to take your questions. And for those of you who are joining us outside of the United Kingdom, the map on the right-hand side of this slide shows where Shropshire is positioned in relation to the rest of the UK. Shropshire is the largest inland county in England by square metres and is situated on the English and Welsh border, around 50 kilometres west of our second city, Birmingham. It has an approximate population of 330,000 people and an average income slightly lower than that of the UK national average. And this will become more relevant as we move through the presentation later. And incidentally, my co-presenter Ben and his family have lived in Shropshire for over 1,000 years, and his surname, Corfield, is actually derived from a large valley in Shropshire called the Dale. So for Ben and the local team, this has been a personal project to work on. And before we dive into the details, we have a short video, just about a minute long, that gives you an overview of what was achieved in the project. Bearing in mind, there's no audio to this. Thanks, Ben. Thank you, Ben. I hope that helped just offer a broad overview of what exactly the project achieved. We'll now go on to talk about health in Shropshire. And you might ask us why this project was especially important for Shropshire children. Well, in 2020, surveys showed us that nationally in the United Kingdom, 20% of our children were either classified as overweight or as obese, and the national average for adults stood at 62%. In Shropshire, these figures stood at 30% for children classified as overweight or obese, much higher than the UK average. We also said at the start of the presentation that Shropshire has a lower than average income compared to the rest of the UK. And sadly, for those children living in deprived areas, obesity prevalence can be more than that of double for those children living in affluent areas of the country, making this an acute issue for our local authority. Now, the reasons for this are multiple and do extend beyond that of just household income. One of the reasons for a higher than average weight in Shropshire can also be argued down to its large geographic size but low population densities. Shropshire is a rural county and it has small market towns and villages. This means that the population often have to travel some distance to access either sport or leisure facilities. Being able to create all-weather running tracks within the school's grounds means that we will provide exercise opportunities for over 10,000 children within the duration of the track's usable life. And this is without the children having to travel specifically to a separate facility, as well as being amalgamated into the school day. Now, this project aimed to ensure that exercise became routine, accepted at a young age, and that hopefully these children will carry this on through to adulthood. In addition, studies have shown us that exercising during the school day also helps the children's concentration levels and will ultimately help them with their grades as well. Next slide, please, Ben. Thank you. Now on to some key metrics. It is worth being aware that we have been working with Shropshire Council now as their highways and transport service provider for around 2 decades. And it's perhaps through this mature partnership that we were able to take an innovative approach to create these running tracks. At WSP, and particularly our co-located team with Shropshire Council, delivering the social value and equity is truly integral to our work. We are committed to playing that positive role in the communities where we both live and serve, wanting to go beyond just our technical expertise. So our impact with the Daily Mile project is ongoing and we're very proud of it. In summary, we were using funds that were generated through the government's sugar tax, which is essentially a levy on soft drinks. Shropshire Council received this funding to help support their young people with facilities for healthier living. Now, many schools across Shropshire County submitted bids to want to create running tracks. This means that their pupils could undertake the Daily Mile Challenge, which essentially encourages children to go outdoors to either run or jog with their friends for 15 minutes a day. Now, of the total grant available for the Daily Mile Tracks, there sadly wasn't enough to fund each submission. And the option of part funding every bid or even funding a limited number of bids wasn't a desirable outcome. So Shropshire Council engaged with us at WSP to see if we could help develop an alternative low-cost approach. So when WSP's Shropshire team, namely Ben and his colleagues, took on the project, considering equity also became a key driver. It has meant that they would deliver the best end product for the customer, and in our context, the school children of Shropshire, with an average age of 7.5. So through our operational activities and our relationships on the mature contract, this project, namely the construction of the tracks, was then linked to the cyclical Shropshire Highways Maintenance Programme. In essence, we reused old roads to build new tracks, allowing us to provide these tracks within the available budget, but more importantly, was to create a more inclusive space, and Ben will touch more on that later on in the presentation. Next slide, please, Ben. So how does this project support equity? Well, we all know that much has been shared and discussed about equality and equity in recent times. So we thought it would be helpful to share our definitions of both terms and how they drove our efforts for the council. So starting with the term equality, this essentially means that each individual or group is given the same resource or opportunity, and that's summarised in the top half of the image. So taking an equality-centred approach means that some people already have benefits that others do not. It differs from equity because equity recognises that each person does have a different circumstance, and this means equal outcomes and focusing on equal outcomes and not equal tools, and that's represented by the image on the bottom half of the slide. So our equity-focused approach for Shropshire Council meant that we needed to make sure that every child within the school had the opportunity to use the track, regardless of their circumstance. And central to our approach was making sure that everyone could access this track. Sometimes we refer to this as human-centered design. So our customers, end users, our school children were also part of our design process. And Ben will talk later on in the presentation about how we involved them. But if you are interested in understanding more about equity and equality, my colleague Julian Fartford has done a great video for this year's Chartered Institute of Highways and Transportation Spring Conference, and we can share the link with you after this session. But for now, I'll pass you over to Ben to go into the details of our approach.
Thanks, Nav. So on this slide, I'm going to talk about how we considered equity within the project and how we overcame the challenge of delivering within the available budget. So initially, the 15 schools that applied for a running track proposed their own specification. These specifications differed between each school, but was evidently developed with a limited budget in mind. The majority of the schools anticipated that the budget would only stretch to a stone or tree bark covered track with a width of only 1 metre and a length that was dictated by the budget. When Shropshire Council engaged WSP to develop an alternative approach, equity was the first consideration. We needed to make sure that every child within the schools had the opportunity to use the tracks regardless of their circumstances, and we did this by engaging with the schools and the children themselves. Through this engagement, we identified that the tracks required a smooth finished surface and wide enough to accommodate wheelchair users and carers side by side. And we also felt that a wider track could be used for cycling, creating a dual purpose facility for those who found running difficult. We also wanted to maximise the track length so that they would provide all-weather access to the whole of the school grounds, linking up with existing features. Now, recognising all this within the available budget was a key challenge. We began early contractor involvement with our alliance partner Kier, who are the term contractor for Shropshire Council. Kier were very enthusiastic about being involved in the project, and their support and knowledge were essential. And the budget of £105,000 to deliver 15 running tracks at just £7,000 per track, that was going to be a massive challenge, and we needed to consider every aspect of cost within the operation. The four main elements of cost which required consideration were the design fees, machinery costs, materials, and the labour costs. So to eliminate the cost of design fees, initially, WSP's project team identified the resource requirements and approached staff to investigate the possibility of using WSP's volunteering scheme to undertake the designs. The team were really enthusiastic about this and really enjoyed using their specific industry knowledge and skills to support this local project, especially since a number of the team had children attending the schools. So with careful planning, WSP were able to offer their professional services at zero cost. The second element of cost was the machinery required for the construction. This machinery was on long-term hire as part of the term service contract and was kindly donated at no additional cost by Kier. So after we'd eliminated the costs for the first two elements, it was obvious that materials for the tracks had the potential to be the biggest cost. To mitigate this, we proposed linking the construction of the running tracks to Shropshire's highway maintenance programme. We proposed using waste material from Shropshire's old roads to construct the tracks. And with this in mind, we developed a track specification using old carriageway risings as a sub-base, and Kier's surfacing subcontractor developed a surface course material using a high percentage of recycled road. We identified suitable sites from the highway programme that were close to the schools to reduce haulage costs, and meticulous planning between the two programmes reduced the risk of double handling materials, which reduced costs even further. Subsequently, since embedding equity into more recent projects, it's been evident that added value can often be achieved at minimal additional cost. However, in this project, taking an equity-based approach at the start actually led to cost savings. Now having a plentiful supply of materials from the highway programme, the increased track widths that WSP proposed to ensure that they were inclusive for wheelchair users and cyclists also allowed the contractor to use larger machinery. This meant the tracks were constructed quicker and therefore reduced labour costs. And Kier and their subcontractors also followed WSP's example and used their own volunteering policies to reduce labour costs even further. This takes me on to innovation. And whilst I'd be the first to admit that this was not a particularly technical scheme, after all, we're only building footpaths in a field, the way the team approached the project was very different than our standard delivery model. The early engagement with the schools and their children meant the project was shaped at the outset by human-centered design as opposed to technical specifications and budget restrictions, and this led to a much better outcome for the project. And the project encouraged effective internal collaboration between local authority teams, namely the learning and skills and the highways departments, helping to provide a lasting legacy in the communities that they serve. Now, this project wasn't about forcing children to run around a track. We wanted to create a fun social place for the children to exercise and break up the school day, which means the children not only accepted, but looked forward to the time they spent using the tracks. By working collaboratively with the supply chain partners, every aspect of the project was considered to add maximum value for the least amount of cost, including reusing the materials from Shropshire's road network. And we added value to this project by utilising WSP's volunteering scheme, spreading the engineering input around the team to maximise the amount of volunteering days, ensuring that all of the budget could be spent in constructing as many tracks as possible. The team really engaged with this and enjoyed being able to volunteer their engineering skills for such a worthwhile project for the communities that they work and live in. This leads me on to the final slide now before the Q&As, where I'd just like to leave you with some of the key takeaways from the project. So why is life better? Well, other than the obvious physical health benefits for the children, we're able to create a new social activity for thousands of children in the school environment. And as Nav mentioned earlier, studies have shown that the physical activity improves the concentration levels of the children in the classroom, leading to better grades. I'm sure we're all aware of the type of changeable weather we get here in the UK, and the all-weather tracks have opened up year-round access to other parts of the school grounds as well. This has allowed new safer points of access into the schools from surrounding areas and allowed us to link up existing key features within the school, such as forest gardens. Many of the schools included in the project were rural schools, which are at the heart of the local communities. And a number of these schools have extended the use of the tracks to parents and local residents as a safe place to exercise. So how did we make it fun? Well, whilst the kids were very enthusiastic to use the running tracks, we wanted to add some additional features to help make it a bit more fun for them. These included fun shapes and symbols that we added to the tracks, such as coloured footprints. And during the construction, we got some of the kids to help set out the tracks with us. They got really excited about this, and some of the children set the tracks out to break through the boundary fence so they could escape from school. But unfortunately, we kept them fenced in. We also added information on track lengths and distances, so the children could time themselves and understand how far they'd travelled. This also had the unforeseen benefit that teachers have used this as an opportunity to take maths lessons outside, where they use the tracks to teach children about distance, time, speed formulas. And finally, what did we learn from the project? Well, personally, what I've taken from the project is not to be constrained by traditional professional thinking. Historically, I've often been focused on design standards and specifications and not taking time to consider the human side of engineering and the added benefits that can be provided. So this is something that I now consider on newer projects. And for those of us involved, we've learned that it doesn't take big projects to deliver a long-lasting legacy for our local communities, and that huge benefits for society can be achieved with even modest budgets. when starting with the community's needs in mind, it's amazing what you can achieve. And like WSP's local government business, we can all use the relationships we have with both our clients and supply chain partners to make projects like this possible. These relationships that we have are built over time on trust and collaboration, which has allowed this project, along with numerous other examples across WSP, to become a reality and demonstrates the value that can be added to societies through the maturity of long-term relationships like the ones we have in Shropshire. So that concludes our presentation, and both Nav and myself would like to thank you for attending and listening to us today. We'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have for us regarding this project.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Nav, for a fantastic presentation. Before moving into the Q&A period, I would like to remind attendees to enter your questions in the question box on the GoToWebinar platform, and also you can download the PDF version of the presentation from the handout box on the dashboard. I will start with the first question. Ben, if you can open your webcam, please. Thank you. Do you have any other examples, perhaps even outside of service delivery, where you demonstrate a commitment to equity?
I'll take that one, Ben, if that's okay.
Yep.
So as a discipline, we are privileged to be serving numerous local authorities across the United Kingdom. And one particular example I'll share with you is from our Northamptonshire Commission, where we didn't just focus on the services we deliver for the client, but we looked inward as a team and decided to offer internships and work experience opportunities for students with supported learning needs. And that was a really good example of sort of cultural change through equity, because we were able to do interview training and bring these students into our workplace, understand where their strengths were, allow them to work with us, but also they helped us understand the value of diversity and inclusion in a way that then ultimately improved the services we delivered in the highways and transportation context as well. So that's a particularly special project as well, because it shows that you don't always have to look outwards as well. You can look inward, think about inclusion and equity in the context of your teams, and your service provision will consequently also be enhanced.
Thank you. We received a question from WSP in the US, and this is the question: how this strategy employed in the UK be imported to the US? Happy
for me to take that one, Ben?
Yes, you carry on.
So I think actually there's a great deal that could be transferred to the US, and perhaps any other country colleagues are listening from, because the principles are about starting your project with a diverse stakeholder group as possible. The only thing I would add to that is that because this was a United Kingdom based project, we are governed here by a legislation known as the Equality Act of 2010. And within that legislation, there are terms known as protected characteristics, which looks after particular groups in society. So it'd be worth just checking what the legislative umbrella is in your respective countries. But the principle of, diverse stakeholder inclusion at the start of a project, I think is certainly something we can all as professionals take away and consider. Just getting different voices around the table to enhance your end product is a good move.
Thank you. We have a comment here. Wonderful project. Thank you for sharing. What is being done to fund track maintenance and repair? We have two questions about it, actually.
That's probably one for me. The maintenance costs for the tracks were explained and passed over to the schools at the outset. The track specification that we put forward was quite robust. We'd got through the highways project, we'd got almost an unlimited amount of material. So it could be argued that we've probably over-engineered some of these tracks slightly just to make sure that we've got as much longevity in them as possible. So they should last plenty of years. Is what we also wanted to do though with the schools was, with our engineering knowledge, we put a little fact sheet together for them to explain how to keep them in optimum condition, and when they may need to be thinking about certain interventions into the track's lifespan, such as slurry sealing the track just to reseal it and keep it operational for as long as possible. But ultimately, the maintenance costs for the track are sat now with the schools.
Thank you. Do the track exclusively belong to the schools, or are they open to public as well?
They're exclusively belong to the schools, except in areas. There's certain schools that it's a bit of a unique situation in whereby there was 2 schools at least in the project that had got community-owned fields that we'd built the tracks in with that permission. So these aren't within the school grounds and aren't fenced in with the security fencing for the school. So these are opened up to the wider communities as well. It's really great to see. Actually, there's a few schools I'd gone to have a look at the tracks when we'd finished, and the parents had come in the day and in the morning and dropped the children off who'd gone into school assembly. And when I looked over in the field, there was at least half a dozen parents running around the track with their sports kit on. So that was really nice to see.
Fantastic, thank you. Do you have any other plans to roll this out to other commissions?
Do you want me to take that one, Nav? Certainly as a lessons learned, I think one of the things that's changed recently here in the UK is that the sugar tax has now been abolished. The new government in place doesn't seem to be keen on reintroducing it, so we don't know for the future what type of funding is going to come to feed projects like this. But we delivered it with such value for money that the client was very keen and actually wrote back to the DFT, the Department for Transport, to request additional fundings because they felt that it had been spent so wisely. So the model is now there for delivery in the future, but we'll just have to see what kind of funding comes through.
Thank you. Did you consider the chemical component of the recycled material? And also, have you evaluated the success rate? Do the pupils actually run the mile?
Do you want me to take that one again, Nav? Okay. So the first part of that question, the chemical analysis, the answer is yes. We tested the majority of sites that we used the materials from to build the running tracks. I'll explain why it's the majority in a minute and not all. Obviously, we didn't want to introduce contaminants into a school environment, so it was important that we tested the material from the roads. What we were looking for specifically was coal tar contamination. Coal tar is a byproduct produced when you burn coal. Fundamentally, this is produced in large quantities from things like coal-fired power stations. And that byproduct was used in asphalt mixes in the UK. Now, it's particularly pertinent in Shropshire, and we were expecting it to find it, which is why we tested robustly. And that's because up until very recently, we've had a coal-fired power station operational in our county for probably the last 50, 60 years now. And we get a lot of that contaminant in our road network. Coal tar has a lot of fantastic properties that make its inclusion in asphalt mixes really beneficial, but it does have one fairly major and potentially fatal drawback, and that is it's carcinogenic. So we did not want to introduce that as a contaminant into the school ground, so we tested. I said earlier that we tested the majority of sites, not all of them. And the reason we didn't test all of them is because some of the sites we had very strong asset data on those particular sites. The use of coal tar in asphalt mixes was banned in the UK after 1982, I think it was, the early 1980s anyway. So we'd got fairly strong as-built data, or very strong as-built data from the site. So we knew that there was no contaminants in some of those sites, so we didn't test for it. I've got to that age now, and I've been in Shropshire so long, where that I'm actually starting to resurface sites that I'd resurfaced originally when I was an engineer. And for the one particular site we did was one of the first jobs I worked on at WSP. So it just goes to show how old I am now, that we're sort of relaying the roads that I did I started work on 20 years ago. So we didn't test everything. The other thing probably worth mentioning in regards to contamination, it works both ways. We didn't want to introduce contaminants into the school environment, but we were going into environments that we didn't have very much information on. We needed to make sure that there was no contaminants already there. And that might sound a little bit strange. Why would there be contaminants in a school? But we did find out that one of the schools in the program was built on an old Victorian rubbish dump. So our desktop surveys from that identified that, and we had to take particular measures to work safely for our workforce in that school because of potentially the presence of contaminants, methane gas, and other nasty things that rock up in Victorian rubbish dumps. So that's contamination and chemical analysis was taken very seriously on this. The other part of the question was, are the schools using the tracks? I think I'm still in contact with a large percentage of the schools that we built tracks for. It's quite regular. I come into the office in the morning and I've got a new email in my inbox that's got a nice photo of something happening at the school around the running tracks, and yeah, I'm told that the schools are using them all. I get lovely photos of kids running around them still, but I get pictures of the schools using them in ways that we never thought or didn't even imagine they were going to use them in, which is really nice. A lot of rural schools there, so they have a lot of village fetes, and you know, they open the space up to the wider community to host events, and the tracks get used then. So yeah, loads of great communication with the schools on the schools using them as they were intended as a group. But I think the real powerful stories that I get through is when the schools touch base, where the running track has actually changed an individual's perspective on life. There's at least four instances I can think of where I've actually had the child write into me. The school's passed on the details, and you know, they've been worried about their weight or their health, and not being able to and probably feeling as if they're standing out a little bit from the rest of their classmates, and they've really taken to the tracks. And there's a story of one individual who's individual boy who was so keen to lose weight and get fit that he was out there in his break times, in lunch times, using the tracks. And the first time he'd used it, he couldn't even walk around the track in its entirety without stopping for breath. And within 2 months, he'd run his first mile on the track. So yeah, some really sort of heartwarming stories there of individuals that the tracks have really affected.
Thank you, Ben. Fantastic project. So thank you, everyone. We're at the end of our webinar session. Please feel free to follow up directly with Ben and Nav via the contact details shown on the screen. And I would like to thank all attendees for joining today. Thank you for your time, and thank you again, Nav and Ben, for a fantastic presentation.
Thank you all.
Thank you.